You always gotta love the romance of telling someone that you love them right before you go to your possible death. Really is just tugging at the heartstrings. Hello, interwebs. I hope you are all doing well, and I am here to review the latest episode of The Last of Us Season 2. This episode, number 5, Feel Her Love. And I'll be quite frank, I'm going to go into full spoilers for the episode. That I will, as per usual, save spoilers for the game and future spoilers for the potential of the show based on the game for the end of this and give a spoiler warning there. But I don't think I'm going to have a ton to say about this episode. There's some fun stuff and things that I really like, and on the whole, I enjoyed this episode, but there's not a lot really to say about it. It's just kind of a moving pieces on the board episode, which is kind of fine. Those episodes always exist in TV shows. They're never, amazing or like stellar or standout, big episodes, but neither are they necessarily terrible, and you sometimes need those connective tissue episodes. Frankly, that's one of my biggest problems with Star Wars Andor this year, and I love Star Wars Andor, but it doesn't have those connective tissue episodes, which sort of leaves me in some cases with that show. I'm not going to spoil the show, but in some cases with that show being like, oh man, I see how we got from A to B, but I don't necessarily have the stuff in between there that I would have liked to see. And so you kind of need the connective tissue stuff that this episode gives. That being said, there is one big character moment right at the end of the episode that I think is a big leap, especially given the slight tweaks that this show has done from the version of Ellie from the game to the show that I'll talk about in the spoiler bit, that I don't particularly love, that I bought more in the game, but we'll talk about it when we get there. Let's just start off with the opening. I gotta keep praising this show, that even though, I have ups and downs with its depiction of its main core story with Ellie. Even in season 1, Ellie and Joel, I've had ups and downs with it. This show is so good at giving one-off little short films or stories. Like, even in the first season, we get that one-off big gay episode and a few other episodes that were like basically standalones or little one-off stories. Last week, we got the great opener with Isaac. And again, this opening scene, while not as strong as the Isaac one last week, is still another really great opening where you just get the sense of history and space and time and weight and trauma on these characters. This sort of leader who is sort of investigating the hospital and the person coming in to check in on the orders. Like, you just get the sense of like history and drama between these two characters so well without necessarily needing to like be over expository, and it explains what the episode needs you to understand while also giving good drama between two characters that we have never seen before and will likely never see again, or if we do, we'll see in just like small spurts. So the show is just really good about that. It's been consistently great about doing that right from its very first season, and this first scene is no different. I thought there was some really good weight and drama between these two. You get sense the weight on the woman who had sent people to their deaths and was feeling responsibility of that and having to explain herself to her boss. Like, it was all very good, but at the end of the day, like, plot-wise, basically what it tells us is, the basement of this hospital, very, very dangerous. If you know from the game, you know why it's dangerous. So exciting there on that front. But the other thing too, and this is something that like is in comparison to the game, but not necessarily a spoiler for the game. It's just something that changed from the game, which is we learn that in the basement, cordyceps is airborne. And we even see that at the end of the episode when Ellie goes down there and starts breathing in the spores. And which is interesting because in the video game, if you haven't played it, the spores are just part of the way cordyceps works in the game right from the very beginning. It's always been airborne. You have to wear gas masks in the game. So here in the show, they changed that in season 1 to make it more realistic, because if there were spores going around, everyone would probably be infected. There's a little bit more of a buy-in from video games, suspension of disbelief, where you just like go into space and you put on a gas mask and it's fine. With a show that's live action, with real actors, you don't tend to believe that as easily. So, with live action actors, I should say, not real actors, because there are real actors in the game as well. But yeah, so giving the spores to like the basement of this hospital lends an extra sense of like danger and weight that they couldn't use for the game to code the hospital. So I really liked that as like this is really creepy and extra dangerous that the game couldn't necessarily play. So really enjoyed that as just a extra piece, and bringing in the stuff from the video game to add stakes to something that is going on in this hospital. So like that, we also get the reference to the fact that this is the hospital they brought one of the first patients of cordyceps way back in 2003. So all interesting stuff there. Won't say much more about that at this point. Jumping over to Dina and Ellie, we get a few different scenes and I like that we get the sense that Dina and Ellie are on the same page with the fact that Dina is now fully on board and trusting Ellie is immune. They even, when they encounter the stalkers and they go into that one area where, they might encounter infected, literally Ellie's like, look, I can get bit, you can't, and Dina just trusts her and they go off of that plan. So I like that like Dina is like automatically just acknowledging Ellie in her uniqueness and just going with it. And that comes into like the romance stuff. And the read that I get, like Dina at one point says, that's why I love you, but you tend to shoot first without really thinking about it. And it kind of reads to me as young romance. Like they do have good chemistry and it probably is love. But it also is like them just immediately going to love because they're so young. And this is just a relationship that feels good. And that's not necessarily to say that it isn't love and it isn't true, but it is young. So I liked that. It read as, again, true for me, for characters this young. And now I feel very fucking old having said that. But I've been in that place where I'm like, I'm in love, after having dated someone officially for like a week. So been there, and I know what that experience is like. And again, that doesn't mean it's not love and it can't develop into something more mature, but it is that. And so I thought that was depicted rather well. Other things too, we get Dina talking about, her history and her trauma. The one thing I didn't love with this is I get the story that she's telling is like everyone has shit that's gone on in their past. And, if I had this guy who killed my family, I would want revenge too. But what's interesting to me, and I'm hoping that the show kind of develops it, and this is, again, a little bit of a comparison to the game, won't get into, like, plot spoilers, but the game kind of makes immediately clear that Ellie's mission to get revenge for Joel's death is dark and going to... There's just a sense of foreboding and darkness, and it just feels like very dark is the best way I can put it. And nothing good is going to come from it. Whereas Dina's story here kind of gives a sense of like justification to it that you kind of go like, yeah, I get it. You would want justice for that. And I don't necessarily know how I feel about it because I do understand it. And there's a difference between wanting revenge and wanting justice. That is the line that I think the show wants to walk. But I think given the choice that they made to give us a lot of Abby's backstory, for example, that gets reiterated in this episode and things like that, it feels like it's not leaning as far into the revenge. Like it's giving Ellie a lot more time to think about this than I think the video game version of Ellie really gets, or we as the player really get to think about it in terms of the trauma of it all, which leads into the end of the episode to kind of jump ahead. I'll just jump ahead at this point. I'll retrace my steps back to a couple other things that I do want to talk positively about, which is Ellie killing, I forgot her name, the girl that she kills at the end of the episode when they go into the basement, really traumatically. And you get this sense that this is a moment of the show being like, Ellie is going too far with her violence, like beating the shit out of this person to get information on where Abby is. And it doesn't read as believable as a transition point because it just doesn't feel like the show has built up the sense and weight of like her pent up anger enough. Like there's a lot of thought that this Ellie has given to her quest for revenge based on her conversations with Dina, even the addressing of the town hall back in Jackson. And that's not to say she necessarily believes that. And I'm not saying that the anger that she has pent up about Joel's death isn't believable, but we haven't gotten a good enough chance to really see that bubbling through even in small ways. So when it comes out in this big act of huge violence, it doesn't feel like we've traced that arc to that choice and tracked that rising anger and wanting to get revenge bubbling up in Ellie as much as the game necessarily gives us that feeling. And I think part of that comes down to the show not tracking that as much, and also part of just the fact that we're getting this week to week. I mean, in the video game, like, the game is long. There's long segments until we get to the points that we get to in the show, even more than I think like the show has only had like 2 or 3 hours, and if you play this to this point in the video game, it's like 10 hours or something, like something longer than the show has. But there's a difference between the video game, where like I bought the video game and I played it several nights in a row over the course of like a week, as opposed to the show, where like these moments are showed like spread out between 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And as a result of like this spacing between this, I think I need touchstones of that bubbling revenge more in Ellie than I would necessarily in the game, where I kind of have it more in a condensed time frame. Again, not spoiling the game here, I just think it's like a distinction in the adaptation here, where like this moment of Ellie really lashing out in violence reads true in the game in a way that it doesn't feel emotionally true in the show, because the show has given us more thought as well as more time just in terms of emotional processing as the audience that we don't necessarily see with Ellie. And I don't think it, as a result, lands as well, even though it's pretty much the same beat as the video game. So yeah, that's just an interesting thing for me. I know I kind of said I would delineate like spoilers for the game, but it's an interesting thing just I have to kind of parse as why I feel it doesn't land as effectively here for me as it does in the game necessarily. And kind of jumping back a little bit before I get into like game spoiler stuff, I do find the fact that we get that like sort of event with the stalkers and Jessie coming in and saving them to be really fun. I just like the idea of the smart infected. I think that that's really fun. I don't know. There's always something interesting to me, and I've never seen like a huge, really well done depiction of this for me, but I've always found zombie stories where the zombies are intelligent in some way interesting to me, because I'm always sort of like, you know, we vilify zombies because like they're decaying monsters. Like there's no sense of like they're going to be the new form of life on the planet. They're just gonna, you know, kill people and then they kind of decay and rot and go away. Whereas in this show, with the cordyceps, number one, with it being like kind of a different species, not necessarily like they're zombies and dead, decaying, rotting bodies, as well as now they're intelligent, there's this interesting sense of like, well, this could just be a different evolution, you know? Neither necessarily good, like bad for humans for sure, but not necessarily good or bad on a sort of objective scale. It's just life doing life shit. And so I always find that interesting when we encounter that in shows like, oh, they do have some form of intelligence, you know, they're their own life form. It's a different type of intelligence that we do, and they want to kill and infect more people, trying to propagate their species. But you know, it's different. And so I always enjoy that when it comes up. So I thought that seeing more of this intelligent style of infected was cool, to be kind of frank. The only other thing to address before I just slight little game stuff is the scars that we see here. And I don't want to get too deep into this necessarily, but we start to see that the scars are just this weird cult also killing people, which tends to kind of equate the both sidesism to this conflict between the WLF and the scars that Ellie's sort of running into. We kind of even saw that last week with Isaac saying like, oh, you attacked me, we attacked each other, we could just go back and forth with this. And obviously that serves Isaac because he's one who's sort of leading it. So, you know, if he's the one that caused it, it serves him to sort of forget who actually caused the damage. But we don't necessarily know that in the show. And without getting too deep into it, given some of the, you know, historical bases that, you know, the game and Neil Druckmann pulled from for the game, my hope would have been that the show would have tried to break down that sort of both sidesism a little bit more, because we clearly see the WLF is like militarized, clearly has more power, and is talked about killing children repeatedly. And so I was hoping that we get a little bit more of the depth to the scars that we saw in the opening sequence with them earlier this season, when we saw that the dad was sort of like, yeah, we have these beliefs, but they're not necessarily like, we're not fundamentalists, you know, we're not like believing that, you know, the prophet is like definitely holy or whatever. And then we see the scar in last week's episode say, oh, those are heretics too. I hope we get a little bit more of that nuance. than we got in this episode, where you just sort of see this guy being like, oh yeah, we just kill people randomly and brutally. Not necessarily for no reason, but sort of showing them as like fundamentalist weirdos. It leads into the both sidesism stuff that I don't necessarily love. And there's been hints in this season that we're getting a little bit more nuance to that, but not enough so far that I think there's enough depth there. So I hope they lean more into like giving us a more fully rounded understanding of especially the scars and the distinction between the very militaristic WLF and the depiction of the scars and their fight with the scars, who are using bows and arrows. So it's not necessarily fully leaning into overly problematic, but given the historical basing that, Neil Druckmann sort of based the original show on sort of Israel-Palestine conflict, I'll just say it, instead of dancing around it, I really hope the show doesn't necessarily equate them as like both sides are equal. The WLF like clearly is, the bad guys here in terms of like their ability to enact violence on a much larger scale. And so I hope we get a little bit more into that nuance within the show. We shall see, though. But as that being one of my biggest concerns and critiques of the original game, I hope the show is able to critique it a little bit more too. And there's been hints of it, so I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, but we'll see. I think and the depiction this week leaned into stuff that I don't particularly love, but it doesn't necessarily fully lean into like, oh, the scars are just weird fundamentalists, that are just evil. I think we'll hopefully see, we'll track how that'll go as we go through here. But nice to see interesting Jessie coming into the picture. Interesting that Tommy's around somewhere. So yeah, just all that stuff is very good. Quick, just sort of like spoiler warning for the game. Not a ton, really. It might even lean into not necessarily spoilers for the game at all, given what I talked about earlier, but I'll sort of give it at least a little bit here. We do get, again, the reiteration here at the end that, we learn, well, Ellie learns directly from this person that she kills, again, I forget her name, that they killed Joel because Joel killed Abby's dad, and Abby's dad was the person who could have gotten the cure from Ellie. Which is like information the audience knew, but Ellie didn't necessarily know, and I don't think Ellie learned at this point in the game either. Maybe she did? It's been a while since I played it. I don't remember, and I don't think we necessarily knew that she knew at this point in the game either. Again, I have to replay exactly when these plot beats happen because we get weird flashbacks at different points. But again, it doesn't land as well for me, because it's sort of like, oh, it kind of negates her willing to go too far, because it feels like not necessarily that like everything was resolved between her and Joel. But she has more of a sense in the show of like having come to terms with it than she did in the game. Like, for example, even in the episode where Joel died a few episodes ago, she even says to Jessie, Joel and I have a complicated relationship, but it's ours, and I actually even want to go out with him and like talk about it or whatever. And it's just, the show is, and again, I know what probably is going to happen is we're going to get a flashback at the end of the season, or even next year in season 3, of that conversation between her and Joel on the balcony. That is like one of the end scenes of the video game, where they don't necessarily, they like begin to start to talk about the fact that Joel rescued Ellie and, didn't give her a choice in the matter, but doesn't necessarily get resolved. We'll probably get that later on too, and it'll be a similar beat. But there's just, for me, it feels like this version of Ellie is weirdly more emotionally mature than the Ellie. Not that she's like mature, but to me comes across as a little bit more emotionally mature than the Ellie in the game. And able to, not even emotionally mature is maybe even the wrong word, but kind of like more come to terms with her relationship with Joel. And as a result, her enacting this violence doesn't read as true, I guess. It doesn't track as well as it did with her character, because she's like, she understands where Abby's coming from, even if she doesn't like it. She's like had terms to like think it through in terms of seeking justice as opposed to seeking revenge, which has been reiterated a couple times, and even she's said it. And so her go, like, that's the distinction, I think, is like the Ellie in the game feels much more like I am just going for revenge, like just basing pure on anger and hate and just wanting to get the revenge for an emotion that I don't have resolved. And so I'm going to just enact my unresolved anger at others and just get all these feelings that I have just Joel displaced on others, but also the anger that I have at people killing Joel. Like there's just a lot of like mixed up emotions all entangling with each other. Whereas the Ellie here in the show feels like there's been more chances to talk out and process it. And I think we as the audience watching it, as I talked about before, have had more time to process it as well. And because we know who Abby is and why Abby did the things that she did, we now have more terms to like logically come to terms with like, yes, they're wrong, and I fucking hate Abby for what she did to Joel, but I understand it a little bit more and I can process it. And it's not like these unresolved feelings in the air that we as the audience feel, and that also Ellie the character feels, because now she's given all of this information here and seems to have come to a little bit more of a terms of like processing this as justice versus revenge, and also come to terms with like what Joel did necessarily. And as a result, like her just lashing out in anger doesn't read as true. And I think that that's what ultimately, like the subtle nuance that doesn't work for me as well as compared to the game, which is that like I don't necessarily not believe that Ellie would want to go after Abby. Like I buy both versions of the character wanting to go after Abby, but this version of Ellie in the show feels like would be a little less quick to go to that like beat the shit out of someone place that the character in the game, who was a bit more of a raw nerve, would be. And I think that's the distinction. And I think that comes down to just the slight differences in the tracking of arcs that the show has given us, not necessarily the acting, just the slight changes that the show has done from the game. I don't think makes these arcs and these emotional beats land as clearly and cleanly in terms of us understanding the emotionality of it as well as it should. And I think that really kind of comes to a head at the end of this episode. But that's my feeling about this episode of The Last of Us. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. What did you think about it? But beyond all that, I hope you, my friends, live long and prosper.